Okay, hello everyone. I'm Alex Lim, your host, and welcome to AuthorStory, the home of authors and stories that matter. This episode's featured guest is Susan Goldberg, who is the editor-in-chief of National Geographic, and who will speak about the book she wrote along with Robin Terry Brown, Breaking the News, What's Real, What's Not, and Why the Difference Matters. So Susan, welcome to AuthorStory. Thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Alex. I'm delighted to be here.
You're welcome. So first off, you've achieved quite a few things in your lifetime. You know, like the first woman to cover the Michigan governor and legislature. Then you were the executive editor of Bloomberg's Washington Bureau. You were recently voted, I think, in 2013, one of the 11 most influential women in the media by Washington Magazine. And at the moment, you are the 10th editor and the first female editor for the National Geographic magazine. And did you ever think that, way back when you were in like 8th grade, when you wrote Opportunities in Journalism, did you ever think you would get as far as you have?
Really wanted to do in 8th grade was to be a great reporter. And so that is how I started my career. And it just sort of progressed from there. But I've been so lucky and so humbled to be able to have a lot of terrific jobs. My career, I've been doing this for 40 years, has really developed on this seam of societal change. So I did end up having a lot of opportunities that women who came before me might not have had.
Right. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about your being in your field a little bit later. But I'd like to ask you about your experience as a journalist. As you said that you've been in the field for 40 years. And I'm sure that there are some of our listeners who aren't familiar with what journalism actually entails. Sure, you might have heard of this guy's a journalist, that woman's a journalist, so on and so forth. So can you tell us a little bit about what journalism entails?
Sure. Journalists are really the eyes and the ears for the public, so we are out there on the front lines. We're frontline workers, really, reporting stories because not everybody can get to those places or talk to the people who are making news that it's important. So whether there's an earthquake and we're going to the scene and talking about the damage and how people can get help, that's one kind of story. That's a breaking news story, for example. Or somebody is doing a story about what's going on in the election or at the White House, having firsthand interviews with officials and experts talking about the upcoming election and what the big issues are of the day. That's another kind of news story. So that's what being a journalist means. It means being the eyes and the ears for the public. And I think it's one of the most important functions of our democracy, so people can be informed consumers.
Right, true. And so with the stories that you write, do you decide on the kind of stories you write about, or is it given to you? Is it assigned to you?
Oh, no. You mean for reporters?
Yeah, for reporters. Well, journalists in general.
It's a combination. The best reporters are always full of, have a million and one ideas, more stories than you could ever actually get to. And what you do as a reporter is you work with an editor or a group of editors to figure out how to prioritize those. And sometimes stories come up that nobody had planned on because there's a big event and it's a big surprise and you've got to be there right at that moment and cover it. And you have to put aside some of your other stories. But I think editors and reporters work really collaboratively to figure out what to cover. And that's how it's done at every news organization that I know about.
Right. Okay. So, all right. So I'd like to touch on your experiences as a woman in journalism. And I'm sure that, we have some female listeners who will likely be interested in this topic. So I know, everything's, quote unquote, a man's world and all that. And I have to acknowledge the achievements you've made in your lifetime. Especially like being the editor of National Geographic now. Now, there are a lot of things out there, saying how hard it is for a woman to work in a man's world, sexism and all that stuff. What were your experiences like in your field?
Well, I think journalism, certainly at the time that I started my career in 1980, was very male dominated. There were far more male reporters and very, very few women at the top of news organizations. So, you asked me before, did I think I'd end up here? Well, no, because I didn't see very many female editors. There were a few here and there, but there really weren't very many. So I do think it was a very male dominated and continues to be kind of male dominated organization. There were a lot of strides made by female journalists and female journalism leaders at the end of the, at the end of the last century, but I think it's really stalled out in recent years, unfortunately, and women remain in the vast majority of leaders of newsrooms.
Right. Okay.
Excuse me. In the vast minority.
Okay.
They remain in the vast minority of leaders.
All right.
Pardon me. Of newsrooms.
Okay. All right. So did you? I got that you didn't intend to, be in the. Essentially, you're right now. You're kind of like a mentor figure, someone other women could look up to, in being in the journalistic field. So I just like to ask this a little bit of sidebar. We've all heard what it's like to be a leader, but a lot of the stuff out there is from the viewpoint of men. From your point of view, what is your leadership style like?
Well, I hope it's collaborative and that I listen a lot. I like to think, and I know that I do, give a hand up to the next generation, whether male or female. I think you're right in that I do a lot of talking and a lot of coaching and a lot of speaking with this next generation of journalists. And I'm very proud to be a journalist, and I think it's a great career, and I want as many people as possible to be interested in doing this with their own lives, because what we do can make such a difference. We tell stories every day that can help make the world a better place, and that can shine a light into dark corners, and that can expose wrongdoing. That's what a journalist does, and I can't think of a more important, better way, at least for me, to have made my career and made a living.
All right. Okay. Got that. Okay. So now let's get on with a bit of the topic, fake news. I mean, fake news is a commonplace enough term nowadays, but it only gained traction after 2016. And even then, even before that, I mean, fake news has always been around, hasn't it?
Well, I think one of the things that this book makes clear, it wasn't called fake news then, and we can talk about that term in a minute, but there have always been hoaxes and conspiracy theories and propaganda, if you will, that's inflicted on the public. So stories that are wrong, stories that appear factual that in fact are not factual and sometimes are outright lies. So this, one of the things that this book does, I think, is it takes the present moment and really puts it in perspective. We're just calling it fake news now, but I think, frankly, the way the president uses the term is when he says something is fake news, it often is just a story that he doesn't like. It doesn't mean that the story is wrong. It's just that he doesn't like it.
Right. Okay. So what's the difference then between the way fake news is the meaning of fake news now and like the meaning of, well, as you mentioned, stuff like propaganda was before?
I think one of the differences now is that we are bombarded with information 24/7. And unlike, when I was growing up, there weren't as many sources of information. There were national news sources, and you'd heard of all of those. There were local news sources with newspapers. There were, the three major broadcast television stations, right? ABC, CBS, and NBC. And that was pretty much it, right? So you knew where stories were coming from, or the news wires, the Associated Press or United Press International. Now, though, we are also inundated with information and we don't always know where it's coming from. And it's so easy, given the electronic and digital tools that we have, to pass that information on. It's almost like a game of telephone, so that, you get a story and you look at a headline and you go, oh my gosh, that's terrible. And click, 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 you've passed it on to 20 more people, and it might not even be a real story or a legitimate story. So what this book does is it suggests that, you think before you click, that you take a deep breath, and that you look into whether that information you're seeing is real or false. And you certainly don't want to pass along, stories that are not legitimate. Right.
And particularly, I'm thinking about this book. I mean, it's aimed at teenagers, and I'm thinking back to my teenage days. I mean, the only quote, really fake news I really need to look out for that I was aware of was like claims in advertising, now in ads. And now it really, as you said, it's all over the place. So, particularly with teenagers nowadays, they have to know what's real and what's not.
Right. I think what the book does is it suggests that people be curious and also be skeptical consumers. There's a phrase that's a standard in journalism. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek phrase, but it's, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. And, it is kind of funny when you say that, because of course your mother loves you. But what it's really telling people is that they should be sure about where information is coming from and whether that is real. One of the things that I learned in this book, and I think it's just as good of a book for adults, is that about a third of young people told us that they knew they had passed on stories digitally that had turned out not to be true. And nobody wants to be that person. All of us want to pass on legitimate information, because bad information not only misleads, but it can sometimes do real harm.
Yeah. It could be pretty harmful. It's just not about, a white lie or anything like that. This could have big impact on the people, on different kinds of people.
Exactly.
Right. All right. So let's get a little bit into the book. The main author is Robin Terry. Yeah.
Yes, Robin Terry Brown.
Robin Terry Brown. There we go. Okay. All right. Sorry. My interview was a little crabbing up around here. All right. So Robin Terry Brown. So how did you get in touch with her?
Well, she's worked with us, writing books for us for, the better part of 20 years. She's worked especially with our kids' books. And so, she's a journalist. She went to one of the finest journalism schools in the country. She went to the Medill School at Northwestern University. And what she did was she assembled a panel of expert journalists from ABC News and the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today. She talked to journalism professors, and she really used the sum total of their many hundreds of years of experience to talk about the history of news, the history of journalism, to talk about different kinds of stories that people get exposed to, whether those are opinion columns or breaking news stories or investigative stories. And then finally, to how to evaluate whether a story is real or false, how to tell if that story is correct, how to tell if pictures have been doctored, and even looking at websites today and how to tell if they're real or fake.
Right. So this really is up-to-date stuff then. It covers social media, it covers website, it covers the spectrum of what's out there in the internet right now.
It really is up to the moment, and it had to be, because for young people especially, they get about half of the information that they've got from social media and on the internet. So it is crucial that they understand how to be media literate and skeptical and smart news consumers to evaluate that information.
Right. Okay, cool. All right, so I just would like ask a little sidebar question here. What was the process like for you writing the book? I imagine that writing for a book would be different from like writing out a story. Am I correct?
Well, it certainly is. Now, I wrote the introduction to the book. Robin Terry Brown is really the author of a book, but but it certainly is different. At National Geographic, of course, we do both long stories and short stories.
Yes.
But we're doing daily content on our digital platforms. But some of our magazine stories are almost as long as books sometimes, and it can take several years even to report some of those, because you're going off around the world and interviewing so many people. So it is a very different process, but it all boils down to having accurate and credible information that's ethically gathered and then disseminated on different platforms.
Right. Okay. So since, as you mentioned, it's different. There are some aspects that are different, but in the end, it's all about putting the facts out there and putting out what's the proper stuff out there.
That's right. That really is what news is, right? It's information to inform and to help and entertain too.
Yeah.
It's information that can help make people educated consumers, whether it's about voting in an election or what kind of equipment to buy for your home office. Journalism can do all of those things.
All right. Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. So I'd like to go into the book now. Like as I mentioned earlier, you know, the book's targeted at teenagers, and the like I said earlier, probably these are some of the most vulnerable age groups where it comes to reading, consuming news. So I'm sure this is a no-brainer question, okay? But for the benefit of those who might be wondering about this issue, why is it so difficult, so important to give kids the tools needed to figure out what's fact and what isn't?
Well, I don't think any of us want to believe things that aren't true.
Okay.
So, all of us want to understand the reality of a situation. And, you can see it playing out right now in the election.
Mm-hmm.
Our 2016 election, was full of false information put out there by Russians who passed off all kinds of fake stories, incorrect stories, as real stories, and got people outraged about things that weren't true. So that's just one example, but it is so important to understand what the truth is, because it's hard to know how to react or behave if you don't have the basic facts. So there's an expression that I really like, which is a lie can get around the world before truth even gets its pants on. And, it's kind of funny, but it is unfortunately so true that lies can spread so quickly. Lies can spread like wildfire. And unfortunately, in the internet age, they do.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, like the internet's so fast, like 24/7 coverage. I mean, someone on the other end of the world can immediately get information that's from the other half of the world within seconds. And, it's pretty fast.
Well, it is fast, but it can be equally fast to uncover what's real and what's not. So with just a few clicks, you can either choose to pass on bad information, but in the same amount of time, you can also discern whether that story's real, right? A couple of clicks can take you to one of those websites like PolitiFact or Snopes, where you can, write in whether or not a story is legitimate. A couple of clicks can show you whether other people are covering this story, because often when there are big stories with outrageous headlines, one of the quickest ways to determine whether they're legitimate or not is to see whether other people are covering them. Because if these are big, legitimate stories, lots of people are going to be covering them. So you can see, how is the Wall Street Journal covering that? How is the New York Times covering that? How is Fox News covering that? How is CNN covering that? That's one of the best ways to tell whether something's real or not.
All right. Okay. Okay. So there are other issues involved here. I mean, like, journalist code of ethics, defining what free speech is all about, and responsibility, as you mentioned, in spreading the proper news. So how does the book cover this, and how does it kind of explain to the kids who would be reading this?
Yeah, I mean, the book is extremely accessibly written. It's not, written in highfalutin language. It's not tons of inches of gray type. It's colorful. It's really well illustrated. Information is boiled down into bite-sized bits. I think it makes it really fun to read, whether you're a young person or whether you're an experienced journalist. And I have to admit, I learned a lot from reading the book. For instance, the Code of Ethics, we used the Code of Ethics from the Society of Professional Journalists. And these are basic standards followed in professional newsrooms everywhere you go. Everything from needing to make sure that we're getting credible information by talking to real experts in their field, to avoiding stereotyping, to making sure we're acting independently, and then being transparent. Journalists, like everybody else, they can make mistakes too. So when you do make a mistake, that you correct that mistake quickly and prominently. Those are just parts of the journalism code of ethics.
Right. Okay. Okay. So how does one start? I mean, getting kids to thinking about fake news and what's fake and what's real when you.
Well, the way it works in the book is, we have all kinds of examples in the book. We show examples of photographs, for example. So to teach people how to tell whether a photo has been doctored, you know, we show fake stories. There's just tons and tons of examples about how, you know, how to discern whether something is real or not, made very, very accessible. I mean, one of the best ways is if a headline comes across, you know, your news feed and it makes you feel angry or shocked, you know, if you're overwhelmed with that emotion, it's really easy to not notice whether or not the story has all the facts that it should have. So if a headline makes you mad before you can even read the next line, you should read it all the way through to see if the sources of the story are legitimate. Are real experts quoted? Does it come from a credible news source? Or does it make your spidey senses tingle that it's just too good to be real, too good to be true, too outrageous to be true? And then again, see if other people are covering the same thing.
Okay, so it's essentially about checking.
It is about checking.
All right. Okay, cool. Okay. So the book mentions something like about the Truth Toolkit, and this is essentially a checklist of questions that kids can use to sort out what's real and what's fake. And now, I don't want you to give away everything in the book, you know, but can you tell us a little what it's about? Maybe even give an example question or two to show what this is all about.
Sure. I mean, one of the things in the Truth Toolkit is, does this story look or feel like a supermarket tabloid, right? Does it have aliens in it? Is it written in all caps? And does it have a lot of exclamation points? You know, that is kind of a tip-off that might not be a story that you should trust. You know, another one is the story full of typos? Is it messy? Is it sloppy? Does it have bad grammar, bad usage, bad punctuation? Again, no professional news sites no legitimate news sites put out news in that kind of condition. So if it's really messy and really sloppy, it's probably not good. You know, another one of the things you can look at is whether the website itself is a real website from a legitimate organization. And I'm not going to give away all our secrets, but this shows you ways to discern that.
Right. Okay, great. Okay. So in essence then, this book, you would say, it's a very good introduction to kids about the world of what's real and what's not. And I'm sure adults can take away something from this as well.
Oh, I think it's a great book for adults. As I said, I learned a lot from reading it. It reminded me to be really careful when I get information that just comes across my screen, you know, double check that I know where it's coming from. I certainly don't want to pass on bad information. And I think it's kind of a book that is fun for the whole family to read. And I also really love the history in it. It's got great history about hoaxes and, you know, scams throughout time, and it does put today's situation in perspective.
All right. Okay. Cool. Great. All right. Fantastic. All right. And so, Susan, in the last minute or so of this interview, are there any words of wisdom you'd like to share to inspire our listeners?
Well, I think one of the things I like so much about this book is it makes me really proud to be a journalist. You know, this really drives home the function of what journalism does, what the best journalism professionals do, and the difference that they can make, and how much poorer our country and our society would be if we didn't have the First Amendment and journalists out there getting news and information that we need every day.
Right. Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. All right then. So in closing then, our guest is Susan Goldberg. The book is Breaking the News, What's Real, What's Not, and Why the Difference Matters. And you can buy it on Amazon. So Susan, thank you very much for being on AuthorStory. Thank you very much for speaking with us on this very important topic.
Thank you, Alex. I really appreciate your time today.
You're welcome. So everyone, check out Breaking the News, which, in my opinion, is definitely a must-read for kids growing up in today's information society and for adults as well. And also, by all means, go ahead and smash the subscribe button for all the people and stories we'll cover in the future. So see you guys next time on AuthorStory, where we talk to authors and people with stories that matter.